Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, welcome to the class of Introduction to Logic and Critical Thinking. Today, we are going to explore one of the foundational structures of deductive reasoning, that is, the categorical syllogism. Understanding syllogisms is essential for anyone studying logic and critical thinking because they demonstrate how conclusions can necessarily follow from premises when arguments are properly constructed. The form and structures of these arguments rather than their specific content actually determine whether the reasoning is valid or invalid. This is what we call formal logic, a kind of a logic that focuses on the form or pattern of reasoning, not on what the statements happen to be about. Let's begin with the standard form of categorical syllogism. A categorical syllogism is a kind of a deductive argument made up of three categorical propositions, that is, two premises and one conclusion in total. Each of these propositions relates classes or categories of things basically. Now, dear students, what makes a categorical syllogism distinct is that each statement either affirms or denies something about how these categories overlap or exclude one another. In a standard form of syllogism, everything must be organized in a precise way so that the argument's structure can be clearly evaluated. Each categorical proposition must be in one of the four standard forms traditionally labeled as A, E, I, or O that we have discussed in the previous lectures as well. An A proposition is universal affirmative, such as all dogs are mammals. An E proposition is a universal negative. For example, no dogs are reptiles. An I proposition is a particular affirmative, such as some dogs are friendly. And finally, we have the last proposition that I hope you people would be remembering, that is the O proposition is a particular negative in nature. For example, some dogs are not friendly. So dear students, these forms are, the building blocks of categorical logic, and every valid categorical syllogism must be composed of them. Now, a standard form categorical syllogism contains exactly three terms in total, and each term appears exactly twice. These are known as the major term, the minor term, and the middle term. So there are three terms in total, and let me repeat: the major term, the minor term, and the middle term. The major term is the predicate of the conclusion. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion, and the middle term is the link that basically connects the two premises, but never appears in the conclusion itself. For instance, let me share an example. Consider this scenario that all men are mortal. Suhail is a man, therefore Suhail is mortal. Here, mortal is the major term, Suhail is the minor term, and man is the middle term that basically connects two ideas in total. Now, by examining how these terms are distributed across the premises, we can determine whether the reasoning is logically valid or not. Dear students, the structure of categorical syllogism also depends on the figure and the mood of the argument. The mood refers to the types of categorical propositions that make up the syllogism. For instance, it can be triple A or it can be EIO, depending on whether the statements are universal affirmatives, universal negatives, and so on. The figure refers to the position of the middle term in the premises. Now, there are four possible figures depending on whether the middle term appears as a subject or predicate in the major and the minor premises. The combination of mood and figure allows logicians to classify every categorical syllogism into one of the several standard patterns, each of which can be tested for validity using formal rules. Now, let's turn to the formal nature of the syllogistic arguments. When we talk about the formal nature of the reasoning, we are emphasizing that the validity of an argument depends not on its content but on its structure. You can substitute any terms you like into a valid syllogistic form, and the reasoning will always remain valid so long as the form is preserved. For example, the structure that is all A are B and all B are C. Therefore, all A are C is valid no matter what specific terms you replace A, B, and C with. You could say that all cats are animals, all animals are mortal, therefore all cats are mortal. And the reasoning holds. The power of formal logic lies in this kind of abstraction, in this level of abstraction actually. It allows us to analyze the form of the reasoning itself, independent of what the argument happens to be about. The formal nature is what makes logic an objective discipline. In everyday conversation, we often judge arguments by whether we agree with their conclusions or not. But logic, asks a different kind of a question. Not like, do I agree, but does the conclusion follow from the premises or not? A syllogism can have, true premises and a true conclusion, and still be invalid if the conclusion does not follow according to the rules of logic. Conversely, it can have false premises and false conclusions, but still be perfectly valid in any kind of a form. Validity. Validity in the sense of validity in the logical sense is, entirely about the relationship between premises and conclusion, not about whether the statements are factually correct or not. This distinction between the validity and truth is one of the key insights of formal logic. Dear students, like I told you before in the previous lectures as well, that truth is the property of individual statements. Each statement is either true or false. Validity, however, is a property of the arguments as a whole. An argument is valid when its conclusion necessarily follows from its premises. In a valid syllogism, it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time. It is not possible. That's what we mean when we say the conclusion follows by necessity. The syllogistic form, when correctly applied, ensures that if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true, because syllogistic arguments are formal in nature. Logicians have developed a set of precise rules to test them for the validity. These rules actually concern how terms are distributed, how negatives and affirmatives interact, and whether the middle term actually links the other two terms correctly or not. For example, one rule states that the middle term must be distributed in at least one premise. It must refer to whole of the, its category at least once. If it doesn't, the syllogism commits the syllogism actually commits what's known as the fallacy of the undistributed middle, meaning that the connection between the major term and the minor term has not been properly established, and it is not holding so far. Another rule holds that if a term is distributed in the conclusion, it must be also distributed in the premises. Otherwise, the argument commits kind of an illicit process fallacy. These formal rules basically allow us to evaluate reasoning without any reference to content or emotion. When we understand the formal nature of the syllogistic argument, we also gain insight into how reasoning can go wrong. Many fallacies, both formal and informal, arise when people mistake the appearance of the logical correction for the real thing. A formally invalid syllogism may sound persuasive because its content is familiar or emotionally charged, but the logic fails under scrutiny. For instance, the argument like all cats are mammals and some animals are cats, therefore some animals are mammals, may sound fine at the first glance, but it's actually invalid. Why? Because the conclusion does not follow necessarily from the premises. It merely restates an obvious truth without a valid logical connection. And this is what I want you people to understand. Recognizing such kind of patterns basically help us to separate sound reasoning from rhetorical illusion. Now, dear students, to summarize, categorical syllogisms are structured and kind of a formal way to represent deductive reasoning. Their validity depends upon strict kind of a logical form regarding how terms and propositions are arranged and related, not on the subject matter or emotional appeal of the statement themselves. By mastering standard form syllogisms and understanding the formal nature of the syllogistic argument, we actually sharpen our ability to think critically, to construct sound arguments, and to detect errors in reasoning wherever they occur. Logic is this sense, logic, in this sense is both science and an art. A science because it follows precise set of rules of inference, and an art because it trains the mind to reason clearly and consistently. So, as you continue your study of the logic in this course, remember that the beauty of syllogism lies in simplicity. It basically shows us that reasoning can be analyzed and that good arguments can have structure, and that truth, when it is reached through valid reasoning, stands on firm and objective ground. The syllogism basically reminds us that the strength of our thinking does not depend merely on what we believe, but on how we reason our way to those beliefs. That's all. Thank you.